The blizzard hit Montana territory with such ferocity that seasoned ranchers claimed they had never seen its equal. And it was in the heart of this white fury that Caleb Mitchell heard the desperate pounding on his cabin door that would change his life forever. Caleb threw open the heavy wooden door to find a woman collapsing into his arms, her face pale as the snow swirling around them, her belly swollen with child. He caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms wrapping around her trembling form as the wind howled like a chorus of wolves. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please help me. The baby is coming." He did not hesitate. Caleb pulled her inside and kicked the door shut against the brutal cold. The woman was shaking violently, her dark hair matted with snow and ice, her dress soaked through. He could see she was in pain, her hands clutching her stomach as another contraction seized her. "I have got you," he said firmly, guiding her toward his bed in the corner of the one-room cabin. "You are safe now." She looked up at him with eyes the color of summer grass, filled with fear and gratitude. "My husband," she whispered. "He was driving the wagon. We overturned in the snow. I do not know if he is alive. I walked and walked until I saw your light." Caleb's jaw tightened. The storm had been raging for hours, and the temperature had dropped so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. If her husband was out there, his chances were slim. But right now, this woman needed him more than anyone ever had. "What is your name?" he asked, helping her onto the bed and pulling off her frozen cloak. "Marianne," she said through gritted teeth. "Marianne Foster." "I am Caleb Mitchell. I am going to help you, Marianne, I promise." He had delivered calves and foals plenty of times on his small ranch, but he had never brought a human child into the world. Still, life was life, and he would do whatever it took. Caleb stoked the fire until it roared, filling the cabin with warmth. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and tried to remember everything his mother had told him about birthing before she passed 5 years ago. Marianne cried out as another contraction hit, stronger than the last. Caleb knelt beside the bed, taking her hand in his. Her grip was fierce, her nails digging into his calloused palm. "How far apart are the pains?" he asked. "Close," she panted. "Very close. I have been having them since before the wagon overturned. I think the baby is coming soon." Caleb felt his heart hammering in his chest. He was a solitary man, 32 years old, who had chosen the isolation of this mountain ranch after returning from the cattle drives that had defined his 20s. He raised horses, trapped in winter, and kept to himself. The nearest town, Silver Ridge, was 15 miles away, an impossible journey in this storm. There would be no doctor, no midwife, no help. Just him and this frightened woman and a child determined to enter the world on the worst night of the year. The hours that followed were the longest of Caleb's life. Marianne labored with a courage that awed him, biting back screams as the contractions intensified. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths, held her hand, spoke to her in low, steady tones. She told him about her life between the waves of pain. She was 24 years old, married for 2 years to a man named Thomas Foster. They had been traveling from their homestead near Helena to her sister's place in Silver Ridge when the storm caught them. "Thomas wanted to turn back," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks, "but I insisted we keep going. I was so afraid of having the baby alone on the homestead. Now he might be dead because of me." "Do not think that way," Caleb said gently. "You could not have known the storm would be this bad, and your husband made his own choice to continue. You are not to blame." She looked at him with those remarkable green eyes, and something passed between them, a connection forged in crisis. "You are kind," she whispered. "Thank you." Near midnight, Marianne's water broke, and Caleb knew the moment of truth was approaching. He positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his hands washed clean, his nerves stretched tight. Outside, the wind screamed and the snow piled higher against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire crackled and Marianne pushed with everything she had. "I can see the head," Caleb said, wonder creeping into his voice despite his fear. "You are doing so well, Marianne. Keep pushing." She bore down with a guttural cry, her face red with effort. Caleb supported the baby's head as it emerged, his hands trembling. Then the shoulders came, and suddenly he was holding a slippery, squirming infant in his arms. The baby let out a thin wail that grew stronger with each breath. "It is a boy," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a son." Marianne sobbed with relief and joy as Caleb carefully cleaned the baby and tied off the cord with practiced fingers. He wrapped the child in the softest blanket he owned and placed him in his mother's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark, unfocused eyes. "He is beautiful," Marianne breathed, touching her son's tiny face with trembling fingers. "He is perfect." Caleb stood back, watching mother and child, and felt something shift deep in his chest. He had become a father tonight in every way that mattered, even though the child was not his blood. He had brought this boy into the world, had been the first to hold him, had kept them both safe. The weight of it settled on him like a mantle. Marianne looked up at him, her face exhausted but radiant. "I am going to name him Caleb," she said softly, "after the man who saved our lives." He felt his throat tighten. "That is an honor I do not deserve." "You deserve it more than anyone," she insisted. "Without you, we both would have died in the snow." Caleb tended to Marianne through the rest of the night, making sure she was comfortable and that the baby was nursing well. He cleaned up the cabin, changed the bedding as best he could, and kept the fire blazing. The storm continued its assault on the little cabin, but inside they were warm and safe. As dawn broke gray and cold, the wind finally began to die down. Caleb pulled on his heavy coat and boots. "I need to check the perimeter," he told Marianne, "and I need to look for your husband." Fear flashed across her face. Be careful. Please come back." "I will," he promised. The world outside was transformed into an alien landscape of white. Snow had drifted as high as the cabin roof in places, and the cold was still bitter enough to steal breath. Caleb made his way toward the road, or where the road should have been, following his instincts more than any visible landmark. He found the wagon half a mile from his cabin, overturned and buried in snow. The horses were gone, either run off or dead in the drifts, and beside the wagon, covered in a blanket of white, was the body of Thomas Foster. Caleb brushed away the snow and checked for signs of life, but the man had been dead for hours, frozen solid. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful. He had likely died quickly in the cold, a mercy in its way. Caleb stood in the snow looking down at the dead man and felt the complicated weight of the situation settle on him. Marianne was a widow now with a newborn son and no idea her husband was gone. Caleb would have to tell her, and the thought made his stomach twist. He returned to the cabin to find Marianne awake, nursing little Caleb. She looked up hopefully when he entered, then saw his face and knew. "Thomas," she said, not a question but a statement. "I found him by the wagon. I am sorry, Marianne, he is gone." She closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks, but she did not make a sound. She held her baby closer and rocked back and forth. Caleb sat beside the bed, not touching her but present, letting her grieve. "He was a good man," she finally said. "He tried so hard to make the homestead work. He wanted this baby so much." "I am sure he did," Caleb said quietly, "and I am sorry he will not get to know his son." Marianne looked at him, her eyes red but clear. "What am I going to do? I have no money, no way to get back to the homestead, and a newborn baby." "You will stay here," Caleb said without hesitation, "until you are strong enough to travel, and until we can figure out what comes next. You are not alone, Marianne." The days that followed were strange and intimate. Caleb slept on the floor by the fire while Marianne and the baby took his bed. He cooked meals, changed diapers alongside her, and learned the rhythms of caring for an infant. The storm had left behind several feet of snow, making travel impossible for at least a week. They were trapped together in the small cabin, but it did not feel like a trap. Marianne proved to be resourceful and resilient. Despite her grief and exhaustion, she helped where she could, mending Caleb's shirts and cooking when she was strong enough. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives. Caleb told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about his time on the cattle drives, about losing his parents and choosing this solitary life in Montana. Marianne spoke of her childhood in Missouri, of meeting Thomas at a church social, of the dreams they had built together. "I thought I would be happy on the homestead," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, the baby asleep between them. "But it was so hard and so lonely. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, and I barely saw him. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake." "Marriage is hard," Caleb said. "I've never been married myself, but I have seen enough to know it takes more than love to make it work." "Did you never want to marry?" Marianne asked, looking at him curiously. Caleb stirred the fire with a poker, watching the sparks dance up the chimney. "I wanted to once. There was a girl in Texas before I came north, but she chose someone else. A man with more prospects. I took it hard and decided I was better off alone." "That was her loss," Marianne said softly. "You are a good man, Caleb Mitchell. Any woman would be lucky to have you." He met her eyes across the firelight and felt that connection again, stronger now. It scared him and thrilled him in equal measure. This was a grieving widow, a woman who had just lost her husband. He had no right to feel what he was feeling, but the feelings would not be denied. Over the next few weeks, as the snow began to melt and Marianne grew stronger, Caleb found himself falling in love. It was in the way she smiled at him over breakfast, the way she sang softly to the baby, the way she touched his hand in thanks when he brought her fresh water. It was in the quiet moments of domesticity, the shared care of little Caleb, the easy conversations that stretched late into the night. Marianne felt it too. He could see it in the way she watched him when she thought he was not looking, the way she found excuses to stand close to him, the way her breath caught when their fingers brushed. The attraction between them was undeniable, but it was complicated by grief and propriety and the practical realities of their situation. One night, 6 weeks after the baby's birth, Marianne spoke what was on both their minds. They were sitting by the fire, the baby asleep in a cradle Caleb had built. The cabin felt like home now, warm and lived in. "I need to make a decision," Marianne said quietly, "about what comes next." Caleb's heart clenched. "You can stay as long as you need to." "I know," she said, "and you have been so generous, but I cannot impose on you forever. I have been thinking about going to Silver Ridge, to my sister's place. She and her husband have a farm there. They would take me and the baby in." The thought of her leaving filled Caleb with a panic he had not expected. "Is that what you want?" Marianne looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same fear and longing he felt. "I do not know what I want anymore. Everything has changed so much. Thomas has been gone for weeks, and I know I should still be deep in mourning, but I feel alive in a way I have not felt in years. Is that terrible?" "No," Caleb said, moving closer to her. "It is not terrible. It is human." "I feel guilty," she whispered. "Thomas was a good man, and he died trying to get me to safety. I should be thinking of him, but instead, I think about you. I think about the way you held my hand through the birth, the way you have cared for my son like he was your own, the way you make me feel safe and seen." Caleb reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I think about you too, Marianne, all the time. I know it is too soon, and I know people would talk, but I cannot help how I feel." "What do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you, and I love that boy, and I want you both to stay, not as guests, but as my family." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first night when you promised to keep me safe. You became a father to my son that night, Caleb. You are the only father he will ever know." Caleb cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently, a question and a promise all at once. She kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and it felt like coming home. They married in early spring, a quiet ceremony in Silver Ridge with Marianne's sister and brother-in-law as witnesses. The town gossips had plenty to say about the quick marriage and the circumstances surrounding it, but Caleb and Marianne did not care. They knew the truth of their story, the bond that had been forged in the crucible of that terrible storm. Marianne proved to be everything Caleb had hoped for in a partner. She was strong and capable, managing the household with ease while he worked the ranch. She loved the isolation that had driven her mad on the homestead with Thomas because she loved the man she was isolated with. They talked for hours every evening, shared every meal, worked side by side in the garden and the stable. Little Caleb grew strong and healthy, a bright-eyed boy with his mother's green eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest day. Caleb Sr. loved him fiercely, with a devotion that surprised even himself. He taught the boy to ride, to rope, to read the weather and the land. He was there for every milestone, every laugh, every tear. When little Caleb was 2 years old, Marianne told her husband she was pregnant again. Caleb swept her into his arms and spun her around the cabin, both of them laughing with joy. Their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy girl they named Grace, and Caleb delivered her just as he had delivered her brother, calm and steady and sure. 2 years after Grace came another son, Henry, and then 2 years after that, twin girls they named Rose and Lily. The cabin grew crowded and loud, filled with the chaos and love of a large family. Caleb expanded the cabin, adding rooms and a bigger kitchen. He built a barn and fences, gradually transforming his bachelor homestead into a thriving family ranch. The children grew up knowing the story of the night little Caleb was born, the story of the worst storm Montana had ever seen, and the way their father had saved their mother's life. It became family legend, told and retold around the fire on winter nights. Little Caleb especially felt the weight and wonder of that night. He knew Thomas Foster was his biological father, and Marianne made sure her son honored that man's memory. But he also knew that Caleb Mitchell was his true father, the man who had brought him into the world and loved him every day since. Years passed in the rhythm of ranch life. Caleb and Marianne grew older together, their love deepening with each season. They faced hardships, droughts, and harsh winters, sick animals and injured children, but they faced everything together. The bond forged that night in the storm never weakened. If anything, it grew stronger. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Marianne up to the ridge above the ranch, the same ridge where he had stood alone so many times before that fateful night. They looked down at the sprawling ranch, at the house bursting with their children and grandchildren, at the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Marrying me so quickly? Staying in this isolated place?" Marianne leaned into him, his arm around her shoulders. "Not for one single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Caleb. A home, a family, a love that fills my whole heart. That storm brought me to you, and I thank God for it every day." "I thank God for it too," he said, kissing the top of her head. "You and those children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I was just existing before you came into my life. You made me live." They stood together as the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Down below, smoke rose from the chimney of their home, and they could hear the faint sounds of their grandchildren playing. It was a good life, a full life, built on the foundation of one extraordinary night when a woman gave birth in a stranger's cabin and a cowboy became a father. Little Caleb, now a man of 22 with a wife and child of his own, often brought his son to visit his parents. He would sit with his father on the porch watching the boy play in the yard, and marvel at the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. "I have been thinking about that night I was born," young Caleb said one summer evening, "about how easily it could have gone differently. If Mother had not found this cabin, if you had not known how to help her, if the storm had been even worse." "I think about it too," Caleb Sr. said, "but I have learned not to dwell on what might have been. We cannot change the past, and everything that happened, good and bad, led us here. Your mother lost a good man that night, and I will always honor Thomas Foster's memory, but I gained a family, and that is a gift I will never take for granted." "You are a good father," young Caleb said simply. "The best father a man could ask for." Caleb felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. "And you are a good son. I am proud of the man you have become." They sat in comfortable silence, 3 generations of family connected by love and circumstance, as the Montana sky darkened and the stars came out one by one. Inside the house, Marianne was surrounded by her daughters and granddaughters, preparing supper and sharing stories. Grace was teaching her daughter to make biscuits the same way Marianne had taught her. The twins were setting the long table, arguing good-naturedly about who would sit where. Henry was outside with his father and brother, the men of the family gathering as they always did. When Marianne called them in for supper, they all crowded around the table, a boisterous, loving group. Caleb sat at the head of the table with Marianne at his right hand and looked around at the faces of his family. Every single person in this room existed because of one night 22 years ago, because a desperate woman had knocked on his door and he had opened it. He reached under the table and took Marianne's hand, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back, her eyes meeting his with perfect understanding. They did not need words to communicate anymore. After more than 2 decades together, they could read each other's thoughts. After supper, after the dishes were washed and the children tucked into bed and the house finally quiet, Caleb and Marianne stood together in the doorway of their bedroom, looking out the window at the starlit night. "Do you remember how scared you were that night?" Caleb asked softly. "Terrified," Marianne admitted. "I thought I was going to die, and my baby with me. And then you opened that door and I saw your face, and somehow I knew everything would be all right." "I was scared too," Caleb confessed. "I had no idea what I was doing. I was just making it up as I went along." "You were perfect," Marianne said, turning to face him. "You have always been perfect for me, Caleb, from that very first moment." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Marianne Mitchell. I have loved you for 22 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "Always and forever." They stood together in the quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of their love, the family they had built from the ashes of tragedy and the seeds of hope. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the memory of that long-ago storm, the worst storm the territory had ever seen. But inside, all was warmth and light and love. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Caleb and Marianne buried Marianne's sister, celebrated the marriages of their grandchildren, and welcomed great-grandchildren into the family. Their bodies aged and slowed, but their love remained constant, the bedrock on which everything else was built. On a quiet evening in their 75th year, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Marianne turned to Caleb with a peaceful smile. "We have had a good life, have we not?" she asked. "The best life," Caleb agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "I want you to know something," Marianne said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "When I knocked on your door that night, I was not just seeking shelter from the storm. I was seeking shelter from a life that had become unbearable. I loved Thomas, but we were not happy together. I think we both knew it, though neither of us would admit it. And then the storm came, and everything changed." "You never told me that," Caleb said gently. "I felt guilty about it for years," Marianne admitted. "Guilty that I was relieved to be free, guilty that I fell in love with you so quickly, guilty that I was happy when I should have been mourning, but I have made my peace with it. Thomas gave me my first son, and for that I will always be grateful. But you gave me everything else. You gave me real love, true partnership, a family built on respect and devotion. You gave me a home in every sense of the word. Caleb lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. And you gave me a reason to live instead of just existing. You turned my lonely cabin into a home filled with laughter and love. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy that will continue long after we are gone. Every day with you has been a gift, Marianne. They sat together as the stars came out, two old people who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them. When they finally went inside, they climbed into the same bed where little Caleb had been born more than 50 years ago, the bed that had witnessed so much joy and sorrow and love. Caleb held Marianne close, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they always had. "Thank you for knocking on my door," he whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for opening it," she whispered back. And as they drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the life they had built together, Caleb thought back to that young man he had been, the lonely cowboy living in isolation on a Montana mountain. He thought about the night the worst storm in memory had brought a desperate woman to his door, the night he had delivered a child and become a father in the span of a few hours. That night had changed everything. It had given him a family, a purpose, a love that had sustained him through more than 50 years. He had opened his door to a stranger in a storm, and she had brought with her everything he had been missing without even knowing it. As sleep claimed him, Caleb smiled, his arms around his wife, his heart full of gratitude for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had carried them through every day since. It had been the best night of his life, and everything that followed had been a gift beyond measure. The Mitchell family ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the love story that had begun on one extraordinary winter night. The cabin where it all started was preserved, becoming a place of pilgrimage for family members who wanted to connect with their history. The story of the storm and the birth and the instant love was passed down through the generations, inspiring countless descendants to believe in fate and love and the power of opening your door to someone in need. And though Caleb and Marianne eventually passed on to whatever comes after this life, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the land and the family they had created. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure for as long as the Montana mountains stood tall against the sky. It was a love story for the ages, born in the worst storm Montana had ever seen, forged in the crucible of crisis and hardship, and strengthened by decades of devotion and partnership. It was the story of a cowboy who became a father in one night and a husband soon after, who found everything he had been missing in the woman and child who appeared on his doorstep when he needed them most. And it all began with a knock on a cabin door during winter's worst storm, a knock that echoed through the years and changed everything forever.